switch of 30 days and calling to give everybody a program. Introductory offer to be like $120 instead of $400. He said something in church. He said, last year they told me, okay, when they tell you it's up to renew, just ignore it. This guy said, no, we're going to keep sending it to you on your phone, and then they're going to send you a bill, and so you can take advantage of our services. Here's our bill, and if you don't pay it, they'll sue you. So he said, I got a letter in the mail, unless it's on my phone, that tells me to renew your subscription. So he said, let it lapse, and could you respond to the letter or respond on your phone? As soon as it's been 30 days, he said, you call me, and I'll get you there. He said they can do it. They told me that last year. He said, because I said, I said, I'm not going to do that. He said, no, you don't have to. It's about a buck. It's over a day, which is cheaper.
We were in the middle of hockey yesterday or the other day, and she comes up to the glass. Ryan said, what is
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here at the Star Tribune State Fair stage. I'm Patricia Lopez on the editorial board of the Star Tribune, and with me this afternoon is Angie Craig, who is the DFL Congressional District for the 2nd District. Her opponent is incumbent Representative Jason Lewis, and we're going to talk about issues.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Angie, for the people who may be seeing you or hearing from you for the first time, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background and what led you to this place? This is your second time at this seat.
Yeah, this is my second time around. So 2016, I ran for Congress. I ran the 3rd closest race in the nation. We came up just over 1% short, but nevertheless, you lose by a bucket at the buzzer, you come back and you do it again, and that's what I'm doing. Some of you may know I spent almost 10 years on the leadership team at St. Jude. It's an amazing place, but my personal background and story is I grew up in a mobile home park. My mom was a single mom and raised 3 kids on her own. And my grandmother moved 3 doors down to help my mom so she could go back to school and become a teacher. And I know how hard Americans will work to make a better life for their kids because I came from a family just like that. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college too, and I worked my way up 2 different companies onto the leadership team. And my wife and I, we live in Eagan, and we have 4 boys. 2 are in college, 1's in trade school, and 1's still in high school at Rosemont High School.
Let's get started right away with healthcare. That's an area where you've got a lot of experience. There's certainly a lot of controversy about where we take things at this point. The tension has been between access to healthcare and the affordability of healthcare. So the Affordable Care Act did expand access, but interestingly enough, given its name, didn't do a lot for affordability. What would you do to try to control the cost side of that equation?
Well, I grew up in a family without health insurance for part of my childhood, so there's no one who understands better that if you can't afford to pay for health care, it's not accessible to you. And I've been meeting with a lot of folks, especially in the southern part of our district, where frankly the individual marketplace isn't working for them because it's too expensive. So I really believe we've got to offer people more choice. In certain parts of my district, if we would price a buy-in to Medicare where people could choose to pay to be in that marketplace and create another competitor to big insurance companies, that would double their choices.
And that, again, to make it clear, that is an option, right? That would not be mandatory, different from what's often referred to as single-payer healthcare.
Yeah, no, this is an option to buy into Medicare. Medicare runs the biggest health insurance program in the country, right? And if you have Medicare competing with large insurance companies, that's just another choice you have, but certainly not a requirement. 65% of America has employer-sponsored health insurance today. And personally, I don't think people are ready to give up their employer-sponsored health insurance, and so I have not advocated for a single-payer system ever. I think the next best step is to move forward with let Medicare compete with these big health insurance companies, but it's more complicated than that if we really want to get at cost. I managed the health plan for the employer that I work for. I had responsibility for 18,000 covered lives in the United States, as well as our employees in other countries. And I can tell you the one thing is America's paying too much for its health care.
So how do we come at that? You hear a lot about transparency, but that's a lost cause. You call up your doctor and try to ask what it costs for a procedure. Good luck with that. So how do you then begin to try to control those costs?
Well, I think transparency is part of it, but the other part of it is we've got to have people in Washington who are willing to stand up to the special interest. Pharmaceutical companies, the one thing I looked at in our health plan at St. Jude was, 100%, 200%, 1,000% increase in prescription drug costs. And so I think we ought to have Medicare negotiate with pharma companies. I think we got to hold pharma companies accountable. A little known fact is that 70% of the prescriptions, the cost is actually for 10% of the actual prescription. So brand name drugs account for about 10% of prescriptions filled, but they account for 70% of the cost. And generic companies, they're being paid off at the end of intellectual property lifeline not to come into the market. So we've got to stop keeping generics out of the marketplace. That's going to help us drive down costs. The other thing is we've got a country just north of us called Canada, which has the exact same drugs approved. We ought to be allowed to re-import drugs from Canada to put more pressure and competition to brand name pharmaceutical companies. There are a lot of things we can do, and the problem isn't the idea. The problem is you got to take on a lot of special interests in this country, like pharmaceutical companies, to do it.
Do you envision, coming from a business background, is that something that businesses could be enlisted to join in, because they suffer terribly under having to provide this very expensive benefits to their employees?
Well, and what it does is it costs businesses for being able to give you a pay raise. That's what's happening. Healthcare costs are eating up pay raises in this country. We've seen wage depression instead of acceleration. And it used to be, I would talk about the individual marketplace and the things we need to do to stabilize that. But the truth is, every single American is seeing their premium go up. We're seeing the deductibles go up, even in private sponsored health care. So, this isn't just an issue for a segment of Americans anymore. And again, I grew up without access to health insurance for a good part of my childhood. And I spent 22 years working in healthcare. And, the truth is healthcare is complicated, and it's going to take people who understand that, but also understand you're going to have to stand up for some pretty big special interests if we're going to solve the problem.
So before we leave this topic, I want to make sure I ask you about the proposal that is most commonly raised by the other side, and that is insurance sold across state lines. They say that's something that can provide more options to people. You've run programs like this. What's your take on that?
Well, it's sort of a silly argument, because your health plan is going to cover a physician that's in network or out of network. And so if you buy a plan from Alabama, what are you going to do? Drive down to Alabama every time you need to see your doctor? You can already purchase insurance across state lines for all general purposes. And if it wasn't a bad idea, people would already do it. It's just not a practical way to create competition. But I tell you what, making sure that people have choice and that we start tamping down on cost is where I think our priority needs to be. And the ACA, it didn't do anything for cost. It truly didn't. It didn't make healthcare more affordable, and we can't pretend that it did.
Let me ask you about the tax bill that passed. Huge tax cut, provided some benefits to corporations who saw lower permanent tax rates, some temporary benefits to individuals. Tell us a little bit about what the impact has been on your district, and in fact, while you're at it, tell us a little bit about your district and what that looks like, and then whether this bill needs to be retooled at all?
Yeah, so I'm in love with my district. It's all of Dakota County. It's all of Wabasha County. It's all of Goodhue County. It's all of Scott County. It's a little sliver of South Washington County, and it's about half of Rice County.
Some farmland, some business.
Farmland. You know, it's a true swing district. It's one of the least gerrymandered districts in the country, where it's about 80% suburban. If you look at actual voters, and it's about 20% rural. So, you can't just represent one portion of your district, and you have to have the ability to represent everybody in a district like ours. And we the tax bill in particular, the issue that I have isn't do we need tax reform. I believe we need tax reform that focuses on the middle class and focuses on small business and accelerating growth of small business. And I've been a long time advocate for things like retooling, repatriation of foreign income and a lower corporate tax rate in order to stimulate the economy. The problem with the tax bill that was passed last year is that after you service the debt, it's going to add $2 trillion to the federal deficit, and 83% of that investment went to the top 1% in this nation and large corporations. And so the question is, do you want large corporations to have a big tax break? Look, I worked for one. Reducing the corporate tax rate down to 21% and not closing any of the loopholes. That's what we just did. And so would I support tax reform? You bet. But I think that we would have been better off and grown our economy better if we had given it to hardworking folks in this country in the middle class and not to large corporations. We are seeing record corporate profits at this point. We are seeing record what's called corporate buybacks, which is boosting earnings. And again, the top 1% who actually make their income from the stock market, they're doing great.
So if you're in the House and tax bills originate in the House, would you support a bill that takes some of that back and tries to retool the bill in some different way? Or what would you want to see happen, and what do we do with the debt that we now have? I mean, this bill passed and that debt is there and it's got to be dealt with at some point.
Yeah, the truth is our children are going to be left with that debt. And the 17% of that tax bill that benefits the middle class and working folks, working families in this country, you bet I'd support. Repatriation of foreign income, you bet I'd support. But I'd require that American companies, if you're going to bring back foreign income, you ought to have to invest it in infrastructure, in capital in your business, in research and development so that we grow the economy. The way you grow the economy is you put more money into the pockets of hardworking people who are going to spend it. That's how you accelerate GDP.
So you would support a bill that does those things?
Absolutely, I would support a bill that does those things.
Would that need to involve maybe increasing the corporate tax back, taking back a little bit of what they got?
Well, I think you probably need to see the corporate tax rate go back up just a little, but I think you'd want to look at for small businesses, can we continue to see some sort of benefit for small
things that are targeted?
That's right, very targeted. And again, targeted toward the middle class, targeted toward working folks in this country. It doesn't make any sense to me that since this tax bill passed, we are seeing very little, if any, rise in real wages in this country. And if that's what it was supposed to do, it's failed miserably.
Let's talk about education. There's a lot to dissect here, but I want to start with the student debt crisis.
Sure.
It is crushing an entire generation here. It's going to be a drag on the economy at some point. I think everyone acknowledges that. There's plenty of blame to go around. But tell me, what do we do with what we've got now?
Yeah, look, education is one of the most important things to me. My mom went back to school. It took her 9 years, but she got her college degree and she became a teacher. I'm sitting here today because I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college and get an education. And I think we've got to make that available for more folks in this country. I also think, and I don't want to not focus on the need to reduce the cost of higher education and also alleviate the student debt burden. But I also think one of the major challenges people in my district, employers in my district are having is simply finding the right job skills for the workers they've got. So my plan calls for America's investment in a K through 14 education system. The first 2 years of college, an associate's degree, or a trade skill. That is, we need to build that into our education system in this country. That would be a much better investment in this nation than reducing corporate taxes. You think about that for just a minute. The biggest challenge companies have is not record corporate profits. It's finding the right people with the right skills to make them grow and be successful. And so, I think we've got to reinvest in Americans again.
Is that 2 years that would include four-year schools, or are you talking about two-year community colleges?
I'm talking about the first 2 years, an associate's degree at any public university or community college or trade school in this country. And I think, I appreciate there are a lot of people making a lot of money after this tax bill, but I think that top 1%, that we need to take a look at capital gains taxes to say, are we invested in this country or not?
Is that something that is realistic to think that we can afford? How would we pay for that?
Well, that's the point. If capital gains, people whose money is just making money in the stock market pay the same income tax as hardworking Americans who get up and go to work every day and work 8-10 hours to make a living, we could pay for a K through 14 education system in this country. And what that would do is it would boost economic growth. You think about the $31,000 in debt that is the average for Minnesota young people going to college. If half of that was cut out, that would be investment in their first home, investment in that first car. I've met with hardworking folks in this congressional district who are putting off that first child. They're putting off marriage. They're making sacrifices because of the high cost and student loan crisis in our country.
Exactly, and they've still got all that debt. So tell me what's your plan for attacking that? Should it be they're allowed to refinance at lower rates? Should they be allowed to declare bankruptcy the way you can for almost any other debt in this country? Should there be loan forgiveness? What options do you support for trying to deal with the existing amount of student debt that there is out there that people are paying even into Social Security? They're having Social Security checks confiscated for that.
Well, I think the business I work for could finance its debt at around 2.3%. And so it's egregious to me that college students in this country are being asked to finance at much, much higher rates than that. So I certainly would support looking at reducing the interest rate for a lot of these students. And the truth is, I think we've got to focus the skills on the jobs that exist in our regional economy, especially in trade schools. If we want to be the leader of the world in 21st century manufacturing jobs, then I think we've got to build the best community college programs and other things that are going to put those skills so that they have jobs once they actually get out of school.
Okay, so I want to make sure that on the student loan debt, you're saying that you would support refinancing at a lower interest rate, and should the government offer low interest rate loans for post-high school debt?
The government already does, right?
Well, it's not that low.
But it's not that low. No. That's the problem. My point is, our corporate business shouldn't be able to finance its debt at lower interest rates than students trying to get a degree in this country.
What about immigration? So, I'm assuming that you're for DACA and path to citizenship and all that, but let's talk about the border security part of this.
Sure.
And what you support in terms of enforcement. There are some Democrats that want to abolish ICE. There are others that just want to see it, reined in a little bit. They think we need a different form of enforcement. You've got all kinds of people who want to build a wall, other types of things. Tell us specifically what you support in terms of border security.
Well, I think we can secure our borders and at the same time work toward a path to citizenship, especially for the dreamers who are already part of our country. They serve in our military, they go to our schools, and I do think we ought to offer a path to citizenship to our dreamers and look at, how do we put a plan in place. The truth is, the problem in this country, and it's still hard for me to believe that it was only 5 years ago that the Senate put a bipartisan group of folks together to come up with a compromise bill on a bipartisan basis for immigration reform in this country. When we think about protecting our borders, I've heard someone say recently, if you build a 30-foot wall, somebody's going to build a 32-foot ladder. I think a smarter approach is going to be using technology. You think about drone technology, you think about sonar, radar. That's a much smarter, targeted approach to securing our borders than some other ideas that I've seen put forth. The idea that our dreamers need a path to citizenship, the idea that we're separating families at the border who have perhaps legitimate, under international law, asylum claims. I think we're a better nation than that, and I think we can do both. I think there are certain industries in America, like agriculture. I was just at Farm Fest. They cannot find workers to harvest, which starts in about a week now. And so we have got to take the approach that, America can do both. We can keep our nation safe, secure our borders, and at the same time, we can, on a targeted basis, bring immigrants for much starved industries in. Because if we don't, we're going to slow economic development, economic growth in our country. We already have a labor shortage in this nation.
Should we then raise the legal immigration rates and perhaps reduce the incentive to come in illegally? The administration would like to reduce those rates further.
Well, I think that's exactly what I'm saying, is that, on a targeted basis, we need to make sure that we're doing what's right to grow our economy, to bring in the workforce that we need. And I want to be clear here. I know that there are some who have called for the abolishment, but I do not support the abolishment of ICE. I believe they play an important role in drug trafficking, in human trafficking. We need to target folks who are offenders and not really look at our we need to make sure that we have an effective policy for immigration, that we only are letting people into this country who are fully vetted. But I do think we need to take a broader approach here, and certainly not from a place of fear.
There's also an effort to change the way we admit immigrants to this country. For a long time, it's been based on what used to be called family migration, and what this administration calls chain migration. Wants to switch it to merit-based. Where do you stand on that? Should it be either or? Should it be some kind of blend of the two? What makes the most sense for this country's needs?
Well, I think it should be a blend of the two. And I don't know if I'd call it merit-based, but I certainly would call it, workforce-starved-based. We've got to be able to sort of open and shut the needs of industry, particularly agriculture is really the best example for temporary workers in this country. And so, I think we need to make sure that, as long as we have a broken immigration system where people feel like it's unfair, there's no way they're going to get in depending on where they're coming from across the world, you're going to have a broken immigration system.
So you mentioned farm workers. That brings us to the Farm Bill. Farm Bill's completely stalled in the House. It's broken down on a variety of fronts there. One of the big pieces is worker requirements for SNAP, which is the major food assistance program for lower income folks in this country. I know that there are some who want to pull SNAP entirely out of the Farm Bill, and there's another faction that just wants to see stricter work requirements. What do you see happening on that if you get there? What would you support?
Well, I was just on a farm last week and in Welch, and we had this very discussion. There was a time when the Farm Bill was the one thing that partisanship actually didn't seep into. And unfortunately, we're not in that time anymore. I would not have supported the House version of the Farm Bill. again, Colin Peterson is the ranking Democrat on that committee, and the other side didn't even reach out to Colin on this bill. And what I believe is, if you actually look at the law, there's a law that was passed in 1996 that already has work requirements for SNAP recipients. The problem is we've now, I think 36 states have now granted waivers on those that particular law. So, I think we need to go back and give states the flexibility to design the work requirements in the way that best meets the state's need. And we, the House Farm Bill also proposed that we create a whole new bureaucracy that would oversee the work requirements. And, I think the bureaucracy was going to cost more than actually providing food to the 1 million households who would have lost it under the Farm Bill. So
there's that tipping point with
again,
enforcement
it's
versus diminishing returns.
right, exactly. So I'm hopeful in the reconciliation between the Senate and the House Farm Bill that we come up with a bill that allows us to still provide food to needy households, and at the same time, the one thing missing from that House bill too was a strong energy title, and we know that in particular corn ethanol in this state is a very important part of the agriculture industry and community, and I was really disappointed to see that no member from the congressional side on the Republican side was fighting for a strong energy title. That's fighting for Minnesota if you're fighting for a strong energy title.
We can't talk about farm without talking about trade and tariffs and all the, chaos that has been set in motion as we try to renegotiate some of the major agreements that we've had. What do you see as the strategy there? What would you like to see change? Was it right to try to tackle these agreements to begin with? There are a lot of people besides the president who say that the country was getting an unfair deal on some of these things.
Well, it's true that we need to always get the best trade deal we can possibly have, and I think and it's fair enough to look at our existing trade agreements, and but again, what farmers tell me they want a fair price for the work that they're putting in, and we know that most of them are facing 5 years of low commodities pricing and feeling like for the commitment they make to feed America that they're not getting the price they deserve, and they want open markets. They want to be able to sell their products in open markets. And what I think we misunderstand about trade is I spent over 20 years working for 2 different companies where exports were the higher percentage of our revenue. So I've had sort of a first-hand view inside a business. Once you lose a trade agreement, those countries go elsewhere, and they're already going elsewhere in ag. They're going to Brazil, and they're going away from the United States in some of these ag marketplaces. And so it could be years before we get this business back. So I think a better place to take our trade disputes is to the World Trade Organization. I think that is the appropriate way. Certainly, if you want to have a dialogue with Mexico and Canada around NAFTA, you better be sure that the unintended consequences are that we are shut out of these international markets forever, because America's only 5% of the world. And without these markets, American agriculture is going to start declining.
Does Congress need to take back some of the authority it ceded to the president in terms of, tariffs in earlier years? They've given him a great deal of authority in that area. Certainly preceding Trump, this has been the case for years and years now. Is it time to dial that back a little bit?
Well, I don't think you can negotiate trade on Twitter, and we've never had the situation where we have a president who's attempting to do that. So I think it's time for Congress to take a look at what are the unintended consequences of starting a trade war. And I think we're going to see more tariffs with China coming on Tuesday of next week, and I am very skeptical that in the end we end up in a better place as a result of the way that we are negotiating trade.
You mentioned energy earlier. I wanted to ask you about the Enbridge Line 3. That's a big topic in your district. It strikes at a number of sensitive areas. It runs through environmentally sensitive areas, and yet We know that pipelines are a better way to carry oil than truck transport. You've got tribal areas involved, and they're concerned. How do you navigate that terrain? And now that it's been granted, it's gotten its permits from the PUC. Where do you stand on that project?
Well, exactly as you said, it is safer to run oil through pipelines in many cases than on trains. And we have a lot of trains running through our congressional district, especially in Hastings and other places. And so, for me, if you've got a decaying pipeline that needs to be, upgraded, there's a lot of upgrading of infrastructure in this nation that needs to occur, and I support that. And Minnesota has some of the strongest laws in the nation when it comes to balancing protections for the environment with these sorts of projects. So what I've said about this is certainly I would support the Enbridge 3 pipeline, but we need to make sure, and I trust the scientists whose jobs it is to make these evaluations for a living more than I would trust me or Jason Lewis, who are, going to have partisan politician views on stuff like this. So if this project makes it through, I think there are about 29 additional permits that need to happen here. I would not support accelerating. I think it needs to go through all of the proper reviews, and if it's determined this could be safely upgraded, then I support the project.
Then you would abide by the process.
Correct.
And the decision.
Correct.
I wanted to make sure that we talked about campaign finance before we end our time here, and I think we're getting close. Tell me, this is one of those high money races. It's a targeted race in this country. Generates a lot of interest on groups inside the state, groups outside the state, other legislators in safe seats that wind up throwing money around. What needs to happen on campaign finance in this country?
Well, I'm now in my second run for Congress, and anybody running for Congress will tell you we spend way too much time raising money. I am really proud of my campaign this election cycle. We have now raised, almost, I think it was almost $2 million the last time we reported. And our current number of donors are over 80,000 donors with an average contribution of $24.11. So that tells you this is really being powered by a grassroots approach. I've seen this firsthand now, and I'm going to tell you, I think we've got to change everything about campaign finance in this country. We have got to turn back the table where, our elections are really about just raising money, and whether that's looking at what the limits are, whether that's creating a federal Minnesota program where you have a refund contribution program. I've proposed that actually. Citizens United, that ruling in 2010 really changed federal campaigns forever. We now see corporate money like we've never seen coming into these outside independent organizations. And what I'd like to see as a first step is overturning Citizens United, but I'm also smart enough to know that would require ratification by the states. And
so a long process.
The alternative to that is really sunshine. It's transparency. It's any time a publicly traded company makes a campaign contribution, not their PAC, but the company itself to an independent or an outside group, they've got to disclose it in their SEC disclosure.
So that would take care of the third-party groups.
That's right.
That you can now they can collect from donors, and then you really can't trace where the money came from.
That's exactly right. And that's the biggest issue. You've got a lot of just anonymous money coming into campaigns. If you look at our campaign contributions, I've signed up to make my campaign contributions public, all of them individual donations. That's available on my website. And so you can see exactly who's contributing to my campaign. If someone is funding an independent expenditure committee, you can't see where it's coming from. It can come from corporate dollars. And the truth is that, you know, it's influencing our Congress. I mean, you know, you don't see these PACs given to challenger candidates. You see them given to incumbent members of Congress to try to influence them. And I think we've got to stop that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us, give us a good look at your issues. Thanks again to our audience too, and enjoy the rest of your day at the fair.
Thank you so much.